Okay, hi. So welcome back to Talking Therapy. My name is Devraj, and today I'm very excited to have Joanna Elizabeth Reed here with me. And Joanna is a yoga teacher, and she also works with mindfulness and particularly with art. And she's running quite a nice Instagram channel and some websites. And yeah, welcome, Joanna. Maybe you'd like to just introduce yourself and how your journey to kind of get to where you are today with the work that you're presenting to the world.
Thank you so much for welcoming me, Dev. It's great to be connecting with you and learning from one another in this conversation. So teaching is really my vehicle for sharing stories, and the stories that I share hold a frequency. And so when I share in this way, it invites people to match the frequency, if you will. And so my teaching method has some steps, and those steps are what we call practice. So art is a practice for me. Yoga is a practice. And I'm particularly interested in the intersections of creative practice and movement. And what do I mean by movement? There's so many different ways we can break it down, but and I can share more about the method as well, but it's really getting awareness, creating awareness within ourselves, and working really with the subconscious mind to perhaps decondition automated programs and ways of being, and then recondition. And this, I feel, is a lot of what you're doing as well. It's reconditioning aspects of self that we want to build up or integrate also through the body, through creative practice, through movement, through expression, through sharing. So it's really exciting. And yeah, I could share much more about this and how I got here, but I'll just take a breath.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. But so if do you like work with groups or with individual clients or that kind of thing, or how does your work take place?
Yeah, it has transformed so many times, just like this phoenix behind me. So how it's currently taking place, or actually maybe I'll talk about how it started, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, because I feel like this ties in so nicely with bioenergetics and how we can work with the body to integrate and to heal. And so my journey with embodiment really began, well, it began when I was attending art school. I was on a scholarship, and I was at this point in my life where there was a lot that needed healing and integration that I wasn't consciously aware of, and I didn't know how to resource myself. And thankfully, I found a yoga practice. This was 2005. And it was the first time in my life that I had some sort of, because the art that I was creating in art school, it was reflective of my inner world. So it was very, very dark. And I actually destroyed pretty much all of what I created because it was just really showing me what was inside of myself that wanted to be integrated, but I didn't have that conscious awareness yet, you know? So I found a yoga practice that it was the first sort of container where I was able to start feeling into my body and starting to create a sense of peace, and also starting to create a sense of control, right? So working with the body to control the breath, to calm the mind in the moment, and to show up differently in the same shape, but to notice what's going through my mind right now with the help of a teacher. You know, when the teacher sort of guides you into, okay, what are you feeling? What are you experiencing? How true is it? At this point, I didn't know anything about limiting beliefs or belief system, or how our belief system is really built on our first 7 to 14 years, right? I didn't know about any of this, but I just knew it was helpful. So I became obsessed. It was a particular style of yoga that was very perform. So I was like on this whole, I have to be the best yogi and that. And then fast forward, I got into CrossFit. I'm curious, has that shown up in your life at all, that particular modality?
I've never done CrossFit. I do HIIT training sometimes around my flat and that kind of thing, but it's not actually kind of licensed CrossFit, but I do a lot of kind of ab workout stuff in the mornings, as well as I mix it up with bioenergetics. but I'm familiar with CrossFit.
Well, I wasn't either at the time, and I really didn't know what I was getting into. But so if we could say that yoga was the first embodiment practice where I was able to start realizing that I could start to cultivate a sense of calm within myself. Again, this was 2005. So what is it? Almost 2022. It was a long time ago. But CrossFit was the first modality. And this is why I just like get so excited about working with other people in an embodied way, because CrossFit started to show me all of these ways that I had been holding myself back in my mind. Right. So to do something that I never thought I could do, it was very solar plexus. Like I was starting to build confidence and courage and standing up for myself. And then I started to ask, oh my God, if I've been telling myself that I could never get a pull up, I could never climb a rope, what else have I been telling myself that I can never have or do or experience in this lifetime? And that was life-changing for me. And I have my own opinions on CrossFit, and I haven't practiced it in a long time. And there is something really powerful about moving energy through the body in different ways. And to fast forward to today, I mean, I've been like I started rock climbing and all these things that I didn't think I could do. So I was building this esteem within myself through the body, and my creative practice would reflect the esteem that was building up. And then it was really in this past 2 years since the pandemic, that I realized that there was so much more that needed to really be witnessed and loved and held and integrated just from formative conditioning. So I've been going a lot deeper into breath work, meditation, as well as other practices that I teach now. But essentially, I teach from my experience, and my experience has transformed so many times. So we might be out in Nepal climbing mountains, or we might be in a rock climbing for beginners or mountain climbing. And I'm just in this place now where it's more about, let's just keep it to the fundamentals, which is really, it boils down to practice and consistency and awareness. Right.
Yeah. Nice. So, so what do you do so do you have like clients that you work with and stuff like that, or?
Yeah. So I do some one-on-one work. I love working with groups, and I've explored different models of working with groups. I also work with organizations sometimes, and often I'm just coming in as a teacher who might be sharing a little bit about mindfulness or meditation, things of this nature. So I have the next sort of iteration of the group experience that's coming in 2022, but I've really allowed myself to take this last year and just integrate and live the work even more fully, because it's constantly transforming, and it's constantly going deeper. So it's exciting.
So what would you do if you got someone coming to you as a potential client? What kind of thing, what will you get up to with them?
Yeah. Okay. So the method is, we want to first create awareness. And how do we create awareness? By going inside. How do we go inside? Well, one practice that's really helped me in my life, which is what I teach, is journaling. Morning page practice. So I've been working with morning pages for about 8 years now. Wow. And I've also found so much in my life, having guided journal prompts as well. But really, it's because how can we create change if we don't know what the change is that we want to create and what's getting in the way of it, right? So we start with that awareness, and we start going within. We go within. Instead of looking externally for the answers, we start to ask. And then we create some awareness around, okay, who's actually talking right now? Is this my saboteur? Is this my child's? Does the child need me to have a conversation with it? How's that child feeling? So we do a little bit of parts work, right? And parts work is really just shifted things for me a lot. We have our sovereign characters within, and then there's, so much of that negativity bias that manifests as we have these fundamental survival archetypes, right? They all have a persona that we all I sense, and from what my research, we all sort of carry these survival archetypes. So who is it that's talking right now? How true is it? And essentially, what are my needs and how do I get them met? And I could just go on, and I want to like pause and breathe here and let you respond. And I'm curious, how do you create awareness with your clients when you're first starting off?
I mean, I do work one-to-one with clients online and sometimes physically, but I tend to, originally I was running a lot more groups for the last decade, really, and, you know, working with 10, 20, 30 people at a time for a day or a weekend or 3 days or something like that. And I guess essentially what I'm doing is using some bioenergetic or cathartic practices. You know, I mean, morning pages is a cathartic practice, but more screaming and shouting stuff or body-based stuff to try and get some of the holding out of the body and also create a bit of openness in the person, because you have to be a bit more open, you know, and also grounded ideally to actually meaningfully introspect and be honest. You know, a lot of people will go through life kind of thinking about themselves like better not look. You know, it's like their inner world is like some kind of cupboard in their flat that's full of old stuff, but they just think, no, I'm not going to look in there. You know, you don't know what you might find, you know. And so that is for probably 90% of people go through life a bit like that in my experience. And so, you know, we need a certain level of confidence and a certain level of openness and a certain level of groundedness, really, before we can bear to kind of open up that cupboard and start to investigate what we've been through and begin to kind of deal with it and find a way. So, you know, same as you know, it's initially to find a way for the individual to, okay, we're going to develop self-awareness, what's really going on inside of me. And then just using an assortment of, you know, I also work as a mental model with like a Reichian character structure, which looks at 5 basic kind of safety strategies that are available to us at different stages of infancy and that tend to come on in terms of what we do with our attention and what we do with our energy. And once those are kind of established, then, for example, someone who has like what's often called the leaving pattern, you know, may even come on in the womb, where the nervous system registers like a slight feeling of unsafety. And basically, as they develop, their attention is much more in the higher part of their mind and their brain as it develops, and it creates people who are very kind of intellectual and good at thinking, but who really, really struggle with sort of deep human emotions and actually really embodying, you know. And that can come on in the womb. Then you have like a trait called like the oral trait, which is essentially a child who comes out of the mum and does not really get enough adequate physical or emotional bond with the mum in the first year. And because we have an expectation from our DNA, you know, being the creatures of evolution, of how mum and dad will be. And if we don't get that bond in the first year and this kind of slow separation, then it tends to leave the person with like a kind of sense of lack inside of them. Like no matter what they get, it's never really going to be enough. And then, you know, they can either get in relationships where they just end up clinging on, you know, they just basically cling on and they ignore their own personality and their own needs. They're just kind of fixated on not being left, on having someone to cling on to. Or they go into the kind of opposite, which is kind of to deny the inner wound from the relationship with the mother, and then just try to keep control and use kind of manipulative techniques to stay in relationships. Like classic narcissist, basically, kind of oral subtype in many ways. Now there's different ways. There's also kids who, like about the age of 2, is when we first start to develop our own kind of ego, really, and that we start to scream no, you know. Like before then, you know, if dad wants to go down the garage or mum wants to go to the shops, they just drag us along and we're just kind of, yeah, it's pretty cool, you know. We don't really have a sense of our own kind of identity or being that we can do something different from what people are just doing for us, you know. So when you get to 2, then you can scream and shout and protest and do all of this. And some parents, you know, don't necessarily handle all that optimally, so to speak, you know, and they may kind of crush the child and get subservience from the child, but then you create a kind of enduring personality, someone who refuses to kind of, they've learned as a little child that their own personality is very dangerous, that they are under survival threat from their parents, you know, if they express themselves. So then they kind of endure life. They go through life in a kind of survival mode, you know. And these kind of aspects from our early infancy are You find them in people all the time, particularly in Western culture. They're very prevalent. And because they're kind of, in Freudian terms, pre-egoic traits, they vastly diminish the amount of drive that we have, so you're kind of always in this position where either if you're very in your head, you've got all these ideas about stuff you want to do, but every time you start to kind of try and do them, like something gets in the way, something just gets in the way because basically you're afraid, underneath it. And then you have people who are in this wounded space who just need someone to cling on to or something to cling on to all the time, or constantly trying to fill a hole, your wound. Or you have the endurers who will work hard and, just trudge along in a job, but, they're kind of terrified of themselves, terrified of their own energy or anger. They learned to push everything down in order to survive. So these three kind of survival traits, and there's others which come on a bit later, but when I look at clients, the overwhelming majority will be quite strong in at least one of those categories, and that's kind of what's causing them to want to change, to want to seek therapy or seek help. Right. And then different ways of working with these kind of safety strategies.
And developing that felt sense of safety within the body and within the nervous system. This is what you're supporting people in accessing for themselves. So it's almost as if they're going back and really reestablishing the foundation from within.
Certainly with the kind of leaving pattern, that's absolutely what it's about. They become very attached in the mind, and then they need a very stable environment around them, or they easily freak out because they're kind of top heavy, And then, these guys just need to open up the throat and the neck and somehow allow awareness to come back and occupy the body. I work on certain circuits. With the oral, it's a little bit different, and with the endurer, it's a little bit different. They're very grounded people, the endurer types, for people on a survival trip. They are grounded, they're fixed to the earth, but they're terrified to be angry, and they're terrified to really show themselves on a deep level, because their first experience of doing that, they were kind of met by a lot of power from their parents, and it overwhelmed them.
Yep. Or shame or criticism. Yeah. It's so interesting for me to hear you describe your modality and the different classifications that you have in terms of what different people experience in their formative years and how it shapes how they're showing up as adults, and what does it mean to really come to a process of maturation and integration. That's something I've really been going deep within myself through the 7 chakra system model. And I'm curious, so I've been working pretty intensively, and again, using my art as an integrative practice for this, but I was working with Anna Dia Judith's Eastern Body, Western Mind, the psychology of the chakras. Is that book in your repertoire? I'm just curious, because it's really been enlightening for me in my own inquiry and embodiment practice too.
I've heard of that book, but I don't have a copy of it. I'm traveling these days anyway. I don't have so many books, but certainly. Like the chakras can be thought of as just somatic centers, with basic, sort of issues attached to them, either spiritual or more just social, being able to express yourself, being able to allow yourself to be vulnerable, from here, being able to be in your power from your belly, this kind of this kind of thing, feeling you can hold safe boundaries, so I guess my work is kind of lower down the chakra system in a sense. I work a lot with core survival emotions and that kind of thing, and the heavy stuff. That's where I originally had to do a lot of work myself to kind of get better, and that's more what I teach, but I think other approaches are great as well. And at the end of the day, is like there's so many people out there who are in a basic state of suffering, whether it's recognized by them or not. Sometimes I hear therapists kind of criticizing each other, and this is wrong and that's right. And in reality, I think there's so many people in need. Anything which appeals to someone and is a way in for them is good fundamentally, no matter what judgments you may or may not have about it as a therapist. And it's got to be, you got to respect that somewhere.
Right. Whatever practice one is drawn to, it is going to, in some way, shape, or form or another, create more awareness around where do we take it from here. And I love what you just described around how you're really working with the lower three, and that the survival, the survival psychology and embodiment. Because in my yoga practice and almost 8 years of therapy, I got really good at letting the yoga be a band-aid for that which I didn't want to, or didn't even realize really needed to be brought up. And it was coming from those lower three: survival, safety, shame, confidence, those sorts of things. So really finding ways to hold space for people, right, wherever they are in their journey, and hold them in their highest potential and hold them as whole. And it's just sort of holding space for, okay, what is getting in the way here? Like, I have a question that came up. Is it okay to ask you right now?
Go for it, sure.
Yeah. So the classic empath and narcissist, do you see those two as having a direct correspondence between the five models? Like the rigid, for example, might be the narcissist, and the oral would be the empath, for example?
I mean, there's definitely I mean, in the old days, I used to have this thing called like, you'd have the dependent and the codependent, codependent relationships, anti-dependency and dependency. And that's kind of a bit like that. And the classic sort of old school male was this anti-dependent character who would need to be in control before he could get in a relationship, need to feel that he was in control. And then the classic old school kind of woman who's kind of culturally been denied the right to say no to things, and doesn't feel grounded in that, just kind of experiences a need to cling on to someone in some way, someone stronger, because her own strength has kind of been culturally pulled out of her, in a sense. And so, you can easily get entangled like that. You can get entangled like that. And then I think nowadays in attachment theory, they call it like the anxious and the avoidant kind of personality types. For sure.
And that awareness of myself, like, okay, because it was really my relationships that brought this up to the surface for me around what needs to be integrated within myself, because there's a pattern. And if there's a pattern that's showing up, I can't just keep blaming it on the external world. I got to go within and really, really be there and stay there. So it's exciting to me how it seems like there are more and more opportunities for people to really go within and take a look and see what's going on, and ask and inquire and reflect, and again, infuse a new way of being into the body. How does it actually feel in my body to feel safe, for example? I didn't realize that I had short-circuited that connection in my body. Cognitively, I could understand safety, but what did it actually feel like in my body? And so I worked with my art practice, I worked with my embodiment practice to just start. And before I could even feel it in my body, I again worked with my cognitive understanding. So an elephant, for example, is very grounded, right? It's very connected with the earth, those big feet. So I started working with elephants and working with my feet in my art practice. And just over time, I realized that, okay, now I know what safety feels like in my body. And then I would watch all the ways that what my mind would try and create a story that said that you're not, even if I was in the moment, right? So it's fascinating how we really can rewire our brains. And it's so vital to get that body, that somatic experience, because otherwise, just like I was going all these years, like even in an embodiment practice like yoga, there was the psychological aspect that was missing. And so it was like 2020, it kind of came together,
Yeah, totally. I mean, we've had I think, really 30, 40 years of, maybe even longer, of really looking at the mind, from I think he just passed away, Aaron Beck, and cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like this, and NLP and this kind of thing, looking at rewiring and changing our thinking patterns, which is really appropriate and useful. But the danger is, and this kind of, began to manifest in the last decade or two, is that you create a personality which is kind of okay up here, but your body's not really down with it. It's not really embodied, and you've all you've really achieved is a kind of greater mind-body split. And then,
Yeah.
on a health level or personality level, or you find yourself getting sucked into weird situations or whatever, it somehow manifests in your life. And so
Yeah.
I think nowadays, we've had this whole time since the 70s when the whole excitement of like mind-based therapy and looking at your beliefs and everything has offered a lot of promise and has helped a lot of people. But it's also becoming more and more clear that it's not really a solution on a deep level.
That's precisely it. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah,
Oh,
that's starting to manifest in, like right now, the area I work, which is around a lot of, well, some of it's originally shamanic maybe, but otherwise it's kind of generally attributed to guys like Wilhelm Reich back in the 30s and 40s. And so there's renewed interest in his work slowly kind of coming up, amongst a whole generation of people, which is, there's been no interest in Reich for like, I don't know, 20, 30 years, really. It's just been kind of on just dripping along in the background of society with a few practitioners getting much, much older slowly and that kind of thing. And now his renewed interest in especially his therapeutic work and some of his kind of scientific work is starting to emerge, where it becomes slowly clear to a lot of Westerners in particular that just working with the mind is not really enough. And,
yeah.
and we don't really have, if I look at the UK where I'm from, there's not really any kind of tradition of body-based therapy within psychology, within mainstream psychology. If you were to do like a clinical psychology PhD, for 6 years, or just a normal kind of degree course for 3 years, there's virtually nothing on the body. It's just completely not really looked into at all. And that's just where we're at. So even if you like really wanted to study the body and to study body-based therapy, there's virtually nowhere where you can really do that, because the whole traditions in the West are so cerebral. They're so cerebral, which is appropriate if you're like want to be an engineer and build bridges. Of course, you need a good mind and be able to work things out so they don't fall down and all that kind of thing. But when you're dealing with humanity and human beings and dysfunctional human relationships or dysfunctional lives, a lot comes down much more to feeling as much as it does to thinking. In fact, probably more to feeling, and the sense of a body is a much, much more important factor. So we've explored the whole mind side of therapy, and the next step is going to be to kind of integrate more body-based stuff. But it's tricky because it's just not in the mainstream. It's just not in the mainstream. So, even on the courses that I run online, they're full of therapists and some hard science people and stuff like that, because there's nowhere else. I deliberately avoid getting any kind of really major qualifications, to be honest, because, I don't really want to be associated with that whole field. I like to be able to do my own thing. And then people who are just already qualified, say in psychology, just want to start to understand the body-based aspect, and can just learn stuff from my courses,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so vital to be able to explore how the two work in synergy, right? Because our thoughts are how our brain speaks, and our feelings are how our body speaks. And yet, just to reflect what you're sharing, we are, especially here in the West, just so much up in the mind that it's so easy to disconnect from the body. Even someone like me with this big, long, like all these trainings and yoga, it wasn't clicking into place fully. And so really having that click into place has been a game changer. And like sometimes I'll even use this Phoenix as an example. Like if we really want to create the change that we're looking for, we bring the heart, we bring the mind, but we also need to bring the heart into the process, right? Because this is a process of deconditioning these programs that have been playing out over and over and over again, and reconditioning to a new way of being. And I think where a lot of people get stuck in this process is, narratives around perfectionism, or not doing a good enough job. Or if I sit myself down to meditate and I don't do a good enough job, then there's something wrong with me. And just holding a sense of compassion for this rebuilding process is so vital. And that's actually how we connected. It was through Wilhelm Reich, who I didn't learn about until this past summer. And I started learning about his work through a conversation I just had with someone in passing. And I was following his the Reich Museum on Instagram, and that's how you and I connected, which I think is so interesting. But I was listening to an interview, or not an interview, but like a biography, and he has this quote that I thought would be fun to share. That's okay, sort of to weave in.
Totally.
He says we need to think from a standpoint of what people need and what they suffer from, and then design our institutions accordingly. Because he was really speaking to how institutions may not necessarily be thinking from that standpoint right in this moment, but really, what would it be like to lead from this place of, okay, what do people need? And what we're talking about now is that embodiment. How am I feeling? How am I feeling in my body? What does it feel like to feel safe, to feel confident? And what have been the conditioned patterns that have been keeping me? And that's where things like the Joe Dispenza meditations really shifted things for me. When I started to meditate on certain feeling states, but then had to go deeper, had to really get back into formative years and sort of reprogramming through some deep therapy practices like holotropic breathing, like shaking, all of these things. And it's just so exciting to integrate all of these aspects into a sense of wholeness, because that's what we're looking for. And right now we're talking about this disconnect that's happening, and we're trying to get it back, trying to get it back in.
Yeah. I mean, I guess things are, I mean, the COVID kind of times of the last 18 months also provide an opportunity to develop awareness, because you're in these kind of limit situations, as we used to call them in the old days of therapy groups, where you're kind of, like I used to do groups where they'd kind of lock about 30 of us in a room for 3 days and just see what happens, It's like, it's similar, you're in lockdown with your partner, and maybe, in the normal world, you're only spending 1 hour a day with your partner, and the rest of the time you're just sleeping or something, and now you're cooped up 24/7. Of course, you can be really getting on each other's nerves and down each other's throats and whatever. And it's tricky, and you probably want it to end and go back to normal, but also it's an opportunity to say, hey, what's actually being stirred up inside of me, what's being triggered, and where am I at, So I mean, I'm quite grateful to COVID in a sense, that for a long time I thought that life in the West in a little bit was so kind of soft and comfort driven, but it's not easy for people to develop awareness. It's not easy because there's not much incentive. You can just eat, you can just eat and watch TV, kind of do both, and just lie there and just plump, Doritos into your mouth and watch a bit more television. And it's kind of, and it kind of soothes you a bit, but it doesn't really provide any kind of long-term solution to the issues, And now that all these kind of things are happening and people are getting stirred up, and people who were just totally straight before now, miles down some conspiracy rabbit hole or whatever, and thinking stuff that they've never thought in their entire lives. It's yes, it's challenging, but it's also, it does give potential for people to transform and develop awareness as well. It's kind of like a mandatory therapy group, in a sense. That everyone's kind of stuck in, whether they want it or not,
Yeah.
And it isn't really being led by anybody either, but that's part of it.
Well, that's why your work is so vital and so needed right now. And all of a sudden, there's so much more awareness that, whether it's conscious or subconscious, there's awareness that's being activated, and activated and activated. And more people are just saying, okay, how much longer am I going to live in this particular holding pattern? And noticing that there might be choice, where maybe before I didn't even realize that I had a choice to show up differently in a particular situation. That was a big thing for me. Just awareness of my own relationship patterns. And, I can fix this, or not fix, but I can develop a new way of being, so that I'm attracting a different vibration that's really in alignment with my best, as opposed to just perpetuating a pattern that really isn't serving me anymore, that sort of thing. Yeah. Interesting times we find ourselves in, for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
I do feel like it's, I don't know. I feel like it sort of suits me. I mean, I've also, for me, it's quite a roller coaster at the start because I was super into a lot of conspiracy material back in the 90s. I mean, I dropped out when I was like 21 and was living in subculture and punk, and I've been involved in drugs and crime and alcohol a lot and stuff when I was younger. Then got massively into therapy for a long time and sorting myself out. But in the midst, somewhere at the end of my before I got into therapy, I was really into conspiracy material and Alex Jones and David Icke. And I was super in that scene. And then at some point, I kind of went a bit through that, and I perceived a lot of it was to do with my adoptive dad and this kind of thing. And I could see, my trips of authority and where they were coming from. And I kind of dropped it all. And, I was aware of some of the good stuff that those guys used to say as well. And then when COVID started, I was immediately like, wow, this is really something a bit suspicious here. So I was totally back in my conspiracy days for like the first time in 20 years, and then something moved a bit from that, just being in it and feeling it in the body, and since then COVID was kind of easy for me in a way, but it did result in me and my partner splitting up as well, after quite a long period of detachment and just agreeing that we really just wanted to do different things in life, basically. And that was also good because it kind of pushed me a bit beyond, because I was left as a little child, as a baby, I was not with my original parents. And so I had very deep oral wounding. And it's been a long journey for me to come out of clinging on to someone else. And so this final breakup, just kind of gave me the chance to find more deeply, okay, can I be okay on my own in the world, and what do I actually want from a partner? What's my authentic position? Because it's hard to know that when you have only ever been in a kind of state of mild addiction in relationships. You don't actually know who you are in a relationship. So it's difficult to kind of, so it's like a slow journey I'm on now to find out a bit more who I am in relationships and how much do I need a partner and what do I authentically need from them, So it's, and all these things have come about really because, I mean, maybe that would have happened without COVID, but it certainly kind of, it's pushed things along to a point where, okay, it forces me into a state of commitment, whereas I'm someone who will kind of, unless I'm under a bit of a crisis, I'm a bit lazy, and in a crisis, I'm super motivated and I'll do lots of stuff. But I need every now and again, if I get a bit lazy and something comes along or I subtly induce it where a crisis kind of comes and then now I need to take some action and motivate myself and deal with things, So it's all been pretty good for me, and it's an ongoing challenge, but that's good, it's good.
Yeah. And I appreciate you sharing what you are here, because I get the sense that people listening, there's a lot that I get the sense that I can relate to in what you're sharing. And I know that if I'm relating to it, then other people are. And it really brings up a lot to sit with, really. There's a lot here just around repatterning, and it's really interesting how when these events shake us up, then we get in. Okay, so I'll speak from my own experience and also sort of what I might be sensing in you, but from my own experience, it's like I would need some sort of big dramatic event for me to just say, okay, what's going on? But developing a consistency within myself has been a challenge. It's been a big challenge. And I feel like that is like so many people who I work with and teach, it's just that consistency. That's like the number one thing that's so difficult, right? Because if things are going good, like it's really easy to not really do the work, right? If things are going pretty well. But if there's a crisis, like, oh shit, like I got to get on it and I got to like get in it. Again, speaking from my own experience, and my hope really as a teacher is that, and also my hope for myself, truly, because I'm just teaching from my own experience, but the hope and intention is that there will be sort of ways of being that, even if it's just a little something every day, but that consistency, I feel for myself, is what allows my esteem and my wholeness and my center to really get solid. So like breathing through the central channel, for example, I think that's another thread of our connection is I discovered Sue Morter's work, the energy codes, in June. And her father, she and her dad developed the bioenergetic synchronization technique. So that's another thread of connection that we have. So learning to work with central channel breathing, for example. Where was I going with this thought? Oh yeah, just even if it's just a little 2 minutes a day, but I'm doing it every day. This is a big aspect of like the method for the teaching, is it's around consistency, right? And it's so hard to be consistent when things are going well, because it's like, why would I need to do the work? But then when stuff hits the fan, it's like, oh, it would have been helpful if I had been sort of building this momentum along the way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. I mean,
Yeah.
if I think back to like when I was a teenager or in my 20s,
Yeah.
the word that sums up the thing I least wanted to hear, the word I least wanted to hear was like discipline.
Yeah.
Discipline
Yeah.
summoned up all these negative images of old people and what they do and stuff like that. And it's a word I was least interested in. But now in my kind of advancing years, I have to accept and recognize that actually discipline is a lot what it really comes down to, the difference between someone who is fundamentally successful and happy in life and someone who fundamentally isn't. Probably the biggest part of it comes down to the ability to develop discipline. And for me, it only came because I was totally undisciplined. I was a dropout punk, drinking and doing God knows what madness. And like, I was the antithesis of discipline. But at some point in all my development, I could see that if I just became more disciplined, my life would work much better. And when that was really, really clear, then I didn't have so much choice. And it's still difficult. It's not so much difficult at times. I mean, I have a basic level of discipline, of what techniques or practices that I'll do on a daily basis just to keep my energy moving and in a good space, and you kind of need that. And like, because I run a channel on YouTube and there's a lot of relatively young people in their teens and 20s who connect to YouTube and to me via that, and a lot of them are guys, a lot of them are young guys in their 20s. And and they always want to know, which exercise can I do to get rid of that, and which exercise can I do to get rid of that. And to be honest, and I do give quite a lot of coaching out for free on a Telegram group and stuff, but my basic position these days is like, here are four exercises which you do for like 18 minutes each day. You need to do that 5 times a week on separate days for 3 months, then get back to me. Because until you like developed a basic level of discipline where you can do that for a length of time, it's pretty limited what anyone can really do for you apart from try and develop that sense of discipline in you. And at the same time, there's a lot of therapies and therapists and coaches who will take money off you if you've got any and tell you they can fix you. But what I see is that it still comes back to discipline. It still comes back to discipline. You can do as many workshops as you want. It still comes back to kind of having the self-esteem and respect to actually almost prove to yourself through your disciplines, prove to yourself that you are worth it and that you treat your own energy and being with respect. People come to therapy expecting like that their self-esteem, can be massively transformed by the therapist. And to a degree, we can certainly help. But finally, you have to almost adopt behaviors which demonstrate self-esteem to your mind. If you keep slacking and if you keep wearing, I don't know, whatever it means, old crap clothes or hanging out with the same old loser girlfriend, boyfriend, or whatever, if you carry on doing those things, you're reprogramming your own being or not your own mind, in this kind of low self-esteem. And also low self-esteem is a defense, basically. I mean, that's something that always spins people out when I tell them, but it's essentially a defense. In World War I, people kept their heads down, they kept their heads down in the trenches because if they put their head up, they might get shot off. And we have learned to do that from our parents or society or teachers. We've learned to keep our heads down so that we don't get hurt, so we don't take a risk and stick ourselves out because we might get bashed like we did, energetically or physically as kids. But it's good to recognize that is a defense. And if you maintain that defense, yes, you'll be relatively safe in life, but you also won't have a particularly exciting life, and that's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much in what you just shared. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So there's a couple things that I want to reflect and ask you about too. That's okay. This is so good. I love where we're landing, because I was reflecting on this just last night, this aspect of discipline. So I want to start with maybe just pinging a question and sharing a little bit, and then bringing the question back into you. And then there's more, and maybe it'll take another. So I was reflecting on, what is the difference between discipline and consistency? What is the difference, etymology, like, and psychologically, how do I experience those words? So that's a question that I have for you. But then just to reflect back, what you were sharing around discipline as so vital to the transformation process. You made me think of a quote that I have shared over the years in some of my yoga teaching classes and experiences and coaching and what have you. It's from Judith Hanson Lasseter's book called Living Your Yoga. And there's a chapter on discipline where she describes how there was a time in her life when she was a mom, and her husband was working a lot, and she was trying to run her business and X, Y, and Z, but she wanted to be disciplined with her yoga practice. And she was equating discipline as volume. So she needed to get a 2-hour a day practice in, even when her life was X, Y, or Z, just so much going on, right? And then a student came to her and said, hey, I've been practicing meditation for 5 minutes a day. And she sort of had this moment she shares in her book where she's kind of like, really? 5 minutes a day? Great. What good could that do? That was sort of what was going through her mind. But then it made her take a step back and reflect on how interesting. I've been equating discipline with volume, and this person has been equating discipline with consistency. And then the quote that she shares that I just love, because I feel like this is so vital to the discipline or consistency process, however we want to define it, is do what you can with your whole heart and do it consistently. And how does the quote go? Transformation is the reason for all discipline, essentially. So what I mean by that is, if we're not bringing intention to whatever it is our practice is, then it loses its ability to transform, or essentially to set us free, right? So when I'm in my practice, whether it's yoga, whether it's creative practice, whether it's moving my body in some way, if I'm not checking in with myself and saying, okay, who am I? Why does this matter to me? Then I'm just going through the motions, and it loses so much of its transformative potential. And I feel like that's like a sweet spot where we're playing with right now is freedom. I mean, discipline really frees us. And yet on the outside, it's like, I think of it as like, this constrains me. I don't want to be constrained. I want to be free. But there's actually so much freedom within a consistent practice, right? Because as you shared, we don't know what's possible if we aren't consistent, and if we don't have metrics, and if we can't measure progress over time. But getting the subconscious mind on board with that that's the challenge. So who are we overcoming? It's really that aspect within ourselves that's saying like, no, you can't do it. You're not going to show up, are you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, most of us keep like some, on a daily level, we kind of worship, freedom, personal freedom. And personal freedom to most people means the kind of right to just check out at any time, and to not be and to not be kind of responsible in a sense, and it's not that discipline is the only way forwards with that, and like you say, I mean, it's a slightly different thing to just, also you can have a practice, like for example, I mean, different practices, it makes how actually aware you are in the practice and how much that matters depends a little bit on the practice. You can go and do CrossFit or HIIT training, and you don't necessarily have to be super aware of your body. It will move your energy anyway. But if you're doing something like bioenergetics, which is a bit more gentle, then it is important. The degree at which you are really feeling your body is important. So different practices require a bit more awareness, or work a bit better with more awareness and not. I see that.
Yeah.
But the discipline often discipline gives people, it's kind of shame in a way, but it often does give people self-respect. That's also a part of it. And it may not be that they need the discipline or to do that thing forever, but for a period of time. I mean, I lived for like 17 years in a spiritual community in the UK, and I started off just coming in there, and then I stayed and worked my way kind of up into the kind of director level, and there would always be morning meditation if you were on the base level program, and a lot of people would just come on the program so that they were forced to do 1 hour of something in the mornings, because they knew that if they were just left in the outside world, they would just find some excuse not to do it. And then, when you have to do it, then you really see the benefit in your own life, that you're kind of compelled to do this at this time when normally you would not do that. You would lie in bed, and so it has this capacity to transform our day, and that's a lot of what it comes down to. Kind of traditional psychology always promises that you just kind of clear your stuff out and you'll just be okay, and all your relationships will work. And I don't think it's very accurate, really. It's not a model that's completely inaccurate, but it's not such a useful model. I tell people you're going to have to work, and you're probably going to have to maintain some of that work long term. When I sleep and I lie down, my neck and my throat kind of clamp up a bit, basically, my throat muscles and that, and I wake up and I can feel the tension lock around here, and being on a computer some of the day, it's the same, so the discipline to me is also, okay, so I'm going to do some practice at the end to kind of come out of that state and be in a good space to meet the world again, and that's the kind of, that's the kind of discipline, and and taking care for yourself, I mean, but what I think for a lot of people is the reality is they should just be a bit more disciplined, and it's okay, When I was a kid, my dad there used to be this thing in the UK called national service, where you had to like join the army or something when you were like 17, and then they got rid of it in the 60s or something like that, or 50s, but in a sense, I think it would do people a lot of good, not necessarily army, but some kind of boot camp structure for a few years. I mean, it's the sort of thing I never thought I would ever say, ever, but when just if everyone just had to do some form of meditation in the morning or something to move their energy, the countries would be a lot better, they just would, and it's kind of, of course we can't, we live in a free democratic society, so you can't do that, but to me, it's nevertheless the case, and when you look at a lot of wars and conflict, it's, a lot of it could be easily diverted or stopped by, the people involved in these conflicts just having to kind of, do a bit more work on themselves, really, it's like, but that's where we're at,
Yeah, and I think what you're creating and what we're creating, with gathering people together, community for so many folks, and myself included, like I'm no different, but community around a shared intention to hold space and support for one another, and to witness the process of growth and transformation. It's not linear. It's often messy. So when I'm up, you might be down. When you're down, I might be up, but we bring people together, and there's more of a accountability when community comes together with a shared intention, isn't there? So you're doing it. You're bringing people together to work through these aspects. And it's like, I'm thinking of the Clarissa Pinkola essay. She has this beautiful essay. And I forget the title of the essay, but she talks about how our task isn't to fix the whole world. It's more to just look for some small corner of our life or our community where we can make a difference somehow. And if everybody was just sort of holding that, that's really what we don't know what the tipping point is or when it will happen. And this is what can really help. So I don't know about you, Dev, but for me, it really sort of grounds me and like, okay, I can be here in my small little corner of the world and trust that this matters, right? And I guess the other thing I wanted to reflect back too is, I know for me and a lot of people I work with, when I set the bar too high for myself around maybe a behavioral change or some transformation I want to create and like do that inner work, it's like if I say to myself I'm going to do something and then I don't do it, that takes such a blow to the esteem, right? And this is all about rebuilding that sense of esteem that maybe never really was experienced as a child. So it's building it from the ground up, right? So that's why I really like to invite people to please celebrate those small wins, even if you're just taking a couple minutes out of your day to check in with what do I want, who do I want to be today, before we get into all the automated habits and behaviors of the day before, right? 95% of what we're doing is just based on the familiar past. Like, it all matters, even the smallest things. And when we show up for ourselves, that builds that esteem. And so how and where am I giving that esteem away? Where am I giving my power away unconsciously? And how can I start calling it back in? It all starts, I think, from this consistency and this idea of there's really no substitute for doing the work, but it doesn't have to be like this big thing. It can start with a couple minutes a day, but that showing up, it transforms everything. I get so excited about this. I love talking about this with you.
Yeah. No, but that's totally correct. I think, it's like, because there also is a class of person. I've been a little bit like that myself. You get turned on to something, you get super enthusiastic, and you're just going to do this for the next month for like an hour.
Yeah.
If you sit back rationally and look at your life, you're not going to keep that up. That
exactly
something, you'll have dropped it, and then you'll be beating yourself up, and then to feel better after beating yourself up, you'll get back into all the bad addictive habits that you're trying to escape in the first place. And it's like a kind of a cycle, and then you go around that a few times, and at some point it's like, okay, I have to go for much more gentle and slow growth, and just, okay, what could I really practically commit to for the next month, as opposed to getting some massive head of energy going, it's like,
that's it.
Like, it's important, because particularly if you come from like a leaving pattern background, and I have quite a bit being up here, you tend to get bursts of energy, I don't get it too much anymore, but I used to get super big bursts of energy when my mind is super active and massively excited about loads of ideas. But then, they don't necessarily really get manifested properly, because I'm just not grounded enough to kind of do them, and so you create more grounding, and then you can just pick a couple of ideas and just slowly move forwards with them. And that these days kind of works better for me, really. It kind of works better.
And what I love what you're reflecting right now, because as you're sharing that, the word I keep hearing is trust. Like, can I just allow myself to trust that all of these big ideas will be manifested, and it doesn't all have to happen all right away. And I don't have to know how it's all going to get out. And oftentimes, whatever these ideas are, oftentimes they just shift and transform as I put them into motion, which is what you do. You get into motion with your body, and we need to get into motion in order to create the change that we're seeking. If we're just stuck in a holding pattern, we're stuck there.
Yep.
So yeah, and just like grounding it too, like our sense of trust, that's really the root chakra. That's where it begins. So that's been a huge one for me. Just again, what does trust feel like in my body? What does safety feel like? And then just starting to know when my mind is making up stories, and starting to retrain that through getting into my body and breathing and feeling and moving and shaking and creating art that has to do with trust and grounding, like these elephants, for example, and then like kind of working up from there. But it's so learning how to do this also, right? It's it could be so easy to go into that self-flagellation like you're talking about. So like just being gentle with the process that we're all like learning, and it's okay. We don't have to be perfect. And with time and experience, as you shared, we learn how to adjust as needed. So yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
There was something that came up for me around the epigenetics of all of this as you were sharing. And I was just sort of curious to hear how maybe epigenetics shows up in your work, because this is something I've been working on and exploring in the past year, like in my art processes, just connecting with how maybe a lot of what I've been working through has been from my own formative conditioning. But also, I think it was when you were talking about being in the war, right? Like these are holding patterns that get passed on through the generations. And I'm curious, how does epigenetics play a role in your work?
You mean epigenetics is, I don't know, is it like the environment influencing how your genes are expressing and stuff like that?
Yeah, and how it gets passed on generationally, right? Like if there's trauma, because I've really been exploring that through things like family constellations.
Mhm.
And I'm just curious if that shows up or how or
I mean, I'm not working so much in that field, I know I've
yeah,
done a bit of family constellations and stuff, and certainly intergenerational or transgenerational trauma, they used to call it, and stuff
yeah,
like that, where
yeah,
your parents kind of imprint things on you, or for example, if you have a mother who's really, really scared, it could be a dad, someone who's really, really scared,
right.
and then they're just in fear your whole childhood. You can feel it when you're walking around with them. You can
Yeah,
have the same level of fear without actually having a trauma. So your mother's
exactly.
always scared to go into a new building, and then you become
Yeah,
scared to go into a new building because you're just kind of copying her, yeah. and
right.
and a lot of people do that stuff, but they don't actually have, the mum maybe has a trauma around new things, but the child
Right.
doesn't actually have that trauma. It never happened to them, but they've got the same behaviors and thinking around it.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff just comes down to also experiencing. You can repattern the mind and give yourself confidence, and I think that's important, particularly if someone's
Yeah.
been in low self-esteem, to just be forced to adopt high self-esteem behaviors. Almost can be really, really useful, because it's so grueling. If you're used to just hiding away, to have to wear like a bright orange Gucci jacket and wander around town or something, it's like, yeah, it pushes all your buttons and your mind is in a massive state of resistance, but it can create
Yeah.
transformation. That's just a very simple example. But
Yeah.
I guess what was I going to say? With this kind of stuff, also we have to, you have to find the situations that you're scared of and find a safe way to
Yeah.
get into them. A lot of people just lack confidence,
Right.
and then you have to find a way to kind of just get out, or people who just lack assertiveness. Ideally you want to find an
Yeah.
environment where you can explore just being completely aggressive, in
Yeah.
a safe way, without freaking people out. And it's like, people need these experiences, so once you've got the experience and you can feel it in the body, you become much more confident. I used to,
It,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So and again, this comes down to practice, right? So what am I practicing that might be helping me to build this confidence or to meet my fear head on? Like, so I got into rock climbing for a while, and the first time I ever tried rock climbing, first it was overcoming this limiting belief that I had told myself I could never be a rock climber. That looks so cool, but that's just not in my story. Nope, that's not for my life. I can't. And then the first time I actually got on a wall, that was, so big for me to actually, and that painting behind me, I was climbing in Spain, like 1,000 foot. I was halfway up the mountain, and I had this point in the experience, and it was only my third time climbing outdoors too. So it was a pretty big leap, but I was halfway up the mountain, Dev, and I got to this point where I was like, it's going to be much more difficult to try and get back down at this point. So I have no choice but to believe in myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I was starting to call on archetypes within me that I didn't even realize that I had, but I just had no idea how I was going to get up. But I just, so like working with my body, it did so much for my self-confidence. Again, with that consistency and practice, I thought, wow, I need to share this with other women in my life specifically. So we were doing climbing nights for a while, and
Wow.
it's just, yeah, it's incredible what can happen when and it's like, it's the most rewarding and fulfilling thing just to see their faces light up when they're doing things that they didn't think they could do before. And then again, it goes back to that discipline and consistency, because that's really what reinforces the new neural networks, right? If we're not consistent, then we lose it just as quickly as we get it. So I love that this is a theme in our presentation, because it's like just so important. But yeah,
Yeah, nice.
yeah.
Yeah. Wow, sounds
So
exciting. Yeah, going up rock climbing and stuff like that. Yeah, cool. So,
yeah, it was wild too. There was this point where I was so high up in the air that I could hear the wing beats of these there were these raptors, like vultures and golden eagles. And again, I work so much with animals in my art, and when I go into these places, I embody the animals. I feel the animal in my body, and again, it's focusing attention and intention to cultivate aspects of my psyche, right? So to be up there and to be at eye level and sometimes even looking down on these birds and to hear the wing beats, it was just like I had to paint about it, to reinforce the memory in my. Anyway, oh my gosh, I could talk to you forever. This is so much fun. So, yeah. Wow.
Well, it's nice to chat, and it's nice to just hang out and talk about all of this stuff. I think a lot of people that listen to our channels find it useful. just to hear. It's always great to I like these little chats. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because therapy is such a great thing, and people are so kind of worried about it. Like I co-lead this thing. I don't do it so much now. For 7 days, people come just to have, they they have to act out sub-personalities and stuff in a safe environment and stuff. And it's transformational for people, and, it will be so, I don't know. Sometimes when I look at all the mental health issues that are building up from COVID and before, and so much of it could be easily resolved for virtually no money by kind of a bit of sharing and body work and stuff like that. It's like, and yet, the society we're in doesn't really kind of have that within its paradigm, and it's just like, it's all a bit mad on one level, but then, you just have to keep going and be with the kind of world we are in, it's like, that's just how it is, even though it's a little bit crazy at times.
Yeah. And making the best of it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I think about the generations that came before me, right? So this mandala, for example, it's representative of 7 generations of ancestry, which makes up 98% of my DNA or your DNA. And you're right in the center. And I think a lot about how in this time that we're living in, with you and I are connecting from halfway around the world. And we're talking about things that generations prior didn't even have the headspace to consider, because there were so many other needs that needed to get met, that need to be met first, like basic survival needs. So it feels like such a privilege, honestly, to be here in this lifetime where there are resources, there is awareness that's being created, and we're doing what we can, and we're talking about it, and we're sharing. And I really love to invite folks in my life. If you learned something valuable, please share it. You never know when a share is going to spark something for somebody else. Yeah. So it really is it's a privilege to connect with you. And I think what you're doing is so important, and just giving more of this voice to the holism of this experience. We got to get into the body. We got to feel it. And you teach people how to reconnect with themselves, essentially. Because how can we really connect with anyone else if we're not connected within, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's also nice what you say about, taking a risk to share yourself. Like it's kind of important somewhere, because a lot of people used to come to therapy groups, and I did myself, and then you keep it very quiet with other people, because you don't want them to judge you. But but by doing that, you never really know what connections you might create, or also what more depth could come into your relationships. And yes, some people might judge you and marginalize you. I've certainly experienced that, but like at the same time, it's somewhere worth the risk to just do that extra little bit to share a little bit more in that kind of risky little area where you're on the edge of your comfort zone. It's like
that's it.
It's a tangible risk that anyone can take.
Yeah. And when the judgment comes in, that's a good thing. That's awareness that, okay, that's not really my people, and that's not my scene. And it's stirring something up. Maybe it's catalyzing something on some subconscious level. So it's all welcome, right?
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff. This has been so much fun.
Yeah. That's a good point to bring this to a conclusion for now, I think, because then it's given people something tangible to do. If you've watched this, then you have to take a little bit more risk with your sharing. I will try and do the same. I will do the same. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so our takeaway from this conversation, if we had to bring it in, is play with that edge of the comfort zone in terms of sharing what has been helpful for your path, because you don't know how your sharing might really spark something in someone else.
Yeah. And it gives you confidence, gives you
Yeah.
confidence, you know. It's like, because just to go, that's something that anyone, pretty much anyone who's got any kind of social life can do, you know.
Yes, that's exactly it.
You don't know what's
Oh,
coming up.
right. Oh, so much fun. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, it's been lovely to have you on this podcast, Joanna. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dev. It's been an honor, truly. And thank you for all the spaces and opportunities that you're creating for people to come together, to connect with themselves and to connect with others. And ultimately, you're empowering people, or you're guiding people through the process of finding their own empowerment, so that they're not only they're not only navigating the stress and anxiety, but they're actually thriving even in all of that which is going on. So you're guiding people into their own process to call that power back to them and really blossom and take flight. So that's what I see you doing, and I celebrate you, and it's an honor to connect with you.
Thank you. And
of course,
it's beautiful that you've empowered yourself and you're taking what you've learned out to other people, you know. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.